The sun rose blood-red over the Arizona desert that November morning in 1877, painting the sky the color of old wounds. Caleb Stone had been riding since before dawn, his horse's breath clouding in the cold air as they climbed the final ridge toward the land he had purchased, sight unseen from Frontier Bank 3 weeks prior. 400 acres of wilderness for $200, a price so low it should have warned him. But Caleb Stone was not a man who asked questions anymore. He was a man who ran from answers. The ridge crested, and Caleb pulled his horse to a halt so abruptly the animal reared slightly, confused by the sudden command. For a long moment Caleb froze in his saddle, his breath catching as his mind struggled to make sense of what lay before him. 7 wooden frames stood in a line across the valley floor, tall and dark against the pale morning light. 7 ropes hung from their crossbeams, swaying gently in the wind. And suspended from those ropes were 7 bodies, twisting slowly in the breeze like grotesque ornaments left by some mad god. Caleb's hands moved before his mind caught up. He spurred his horse forward, the animal sensing his urgency and breaking into a full gallop down the slope. Dust rose behind them in a plume. The distance closed. 50 yards, 30, 20. And then Caleb saw it. A hand moved, just a finger, a single finger curling and uncurling against the dawn. They were alive. Caleb hit the ground running, his boots sliding in the loose dirt as he sprinted toward the nearest frame. He pulled his knife from his belt, the blade catching the first rays of sunlight as he scrambled up the wooden structure. The rope was thick, new, pulled taut by the weight it carried. He sawed at it frantically, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The rope snapped, the body dropped. Caleb jumped down and turned the person over. A woman. Apache. Her neck bore deep bruises, but her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. She was alive. Moving to the second frame, his hands worked with frantic precision. The rope snapped, and he caught the falling woman, his fingers searching for a pulse. Still beating. The third woman. The fourth. Each one brought down, each one breathing shallowly but breathing nonetheless. By the time he cut down the 7th woman, the oldest of them with hair gone white, and eyes that fluttered open to look at him with an expression he could not read, Caleb's arms were shaking and his shirt was soaked with sweat, despite the morning cold. 7 women, all alive, all impossibly, miraculously alive. He stood among the 7 bodies, his knife still in his hand, and for the first time in 8 years, Caleb Stone allowed himself to feel something other than the numbness he had wrapped around his heart like armor. He felt terror, not at what he had found, but at what it meant. Because as he knelt to examine the bruises on their necks more closely, he realized something that made his blood run cold. These ropes had been tied by someone who knew exactly how to keep a person alive. The knots were positioned to compress the throat without breaking the neck, to strangle slowly rather than kill instantly. Whoever had done this had wanted them to suffer, or had wanted them to be found. And in the back of Caleb's mind, a voice whispered a truth he did not yet want to acknowledge. They had wanted him to find them. He loaded the 7 women onto his wagon one by one, their bodies limp but breathing. None of them spoke. None of them opened their eyes except for the eldest, who watched him with a gaze that seemed to look straight through him into some place he had spent 8 years trying to forget. As he laid her in the wagon bed beside the others, she whispered something in Apache. 2 words. Caleb understood them perfectly, though he wished he did not. You returned. The ride back to his small ranch took 3 hours. 3 hours during which Caleb did not allow himself to think, did not allow himself to remember. He focused on the immediate, on keeping the wagon steady over the rough ground, on watching the women for signs of distress, on anything except the obvious question. How did she know? His ranch was barely worthy of the name. A small cabin with a leaking roof, a barn that listed to one side, a well that gave clean water only half the time. He had bought it with the last of his savings, seeking isolation, seeking a place where no one would know his name or his face or the things he had done. And for 3 weeks, he had achieved exactly that, until this morning. He carried the women inside one by one, laying them on blankets spread across the floor. He built up the fire in the hearth until the room was warm. He boiled water and used strips torn from his one spare shirt to clean the blood from their wrists where the ropes had cut into flesh. He did not speak, neither did they. For 48 hours, Caleb tended to them in silence. He gave them water, letting it drip slowly into their mouths until they could swallow on their own. He made thin soup from the dried meat in his stores and fed them spoonful by spoonful. He changed their bandages. He kept the fire burning. And all the while he avoided looking at their faces, especially the face of the eldest woman, whose eyes followed him wherever he moved in the small cabin. On the third night, as Caleb sat by the fire cleaning his rifle, more from habit than necessity, the eldest woman finally spoke again. Her voice was rough, damaged by the rope, but each word fell into the silence with the weight of a stone dropped into still water. "You have returned," she said again, this time in English. Caleb's hands stilled on the rifle. "I think you have me confused with someone else, ma'am. I have never been to this territory before." The woman smiled, a sad expression that held no humor. "Language does not lie," she said, "but men do." Caleb set down the rifle and looked at her directly for the first time. She was perhaps 60 years old, her face lined by years and hardship, but her eyes were sharp and clear. She wore the traditional dress of the Apache, now torn and stained, and around her neck beneath the bruises was a leather cord holding a small stone carved with symbols he recognized but pretended not to. "I do not know what you think you know about me," Caleb said carefully, "but you are mistaken." The woman gestured to the other 6, who were beginning to stir and sit up, their strength slowly returning. "My name is Aida," she said. "These are my sisters, not by blood but by bond. We are the daughters and wives of the 7 chiefs who signed the Redstone Treaty with the United States government in 1867. Do you know of this treaty, Caleb Stone?" Caleb felt the blood drain from his face at the sound of his name. "How do you know who I am?" Aida reached beneath her dress and pulled out a folded piece of old newspaper, yellowed and brittle. She unfolded it carefully and held it up to the firelight. The headline was from 8 years ago, "Cavalry Massacre at Blackwater Creek. 67 Apache dead." Below it was a photograph of 5 cavalry officers standing before a pile of bodies. The second man from the left was younger, but unmistakably Caleb Stone. "I was there," Aida said softly. "I survived because I hid beneath the body of my husband. Chief Kuruk, your bullet killed him. But before he died, he told me to live, to remember, to bear witness." Caleb stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "That was war. I was following orders." "Yes," Aida agreed. "You were following orders, just as we were following our treaty rights to live on our ancestral land. Tell me, which of us was more justified?" Caleb turned away, his hands clenching into fists. "I cannot change what happened. I cannot bring back the dead. If you want revenge, then take it. I will not stop you." "We do not want revenge," said another voice. One of the younger women had risen to her feet. She was perhaps 23, with long black hair and eyes that burned with an intensity that reminded Caleb uncomfortably of her mother. "We want justice, and you are going to help us get it." Caleb laughed, a harsh sound without joy. "Me? Why would I help you?" The young woman stepped closer. Her name was Kiona, though Caleb did not yet know it. "Because you are the only person who can. Because you know the truth about what happened at Blackwater Creek. Because you wrote a report to your commanders exposing Colonel Ashford's illegal orders. Because that report was intercepted and destroyed. Because you were forced out of the cavalry to keep you silent." She paused, studying his face. "And because if you do not help us, the men who did this to us will come for you next. In fact, they are counting on it." "What are you talking about?" Caleb demanded. Aida struggled to her feet, leaning on Kiona for support. "Sit down," she said, "and we will tell you everything. But first, you must understand something. We were not hanged to die. We were hanged to be found. By you." Caleb sat slowly, his mind racing. Aida settled onto a blanket across from him, the other 5 women gathering around her in a semicircle. The firelight played across their faces, casting shadows that made them look like spirits conjured from his darkest memories. 10 years ago, Aida began, our people signed the Redstone Treaty with the United States government. The treaty granted us permanent ownership of 2,000 acres of land here in Red Mesa in exchange for our promise not to interfere with the railroad expansion. It was signed by 7 chiefs, witnessed by a federal agent named Thomas Grayson and a cavalry officer named Victor Ashford. "Do you remember Captain Ashford, Caleb Stone?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "He is Colonel Ashford now. Last I heard, he retired from the military 5 years ago." "He did more than retire," said a third woman, her voice bitter. Her name was Muna, a widow whose husband had died in a convenient accident 6 months prior. He became the chairman of Frontier Investment Company, the same company that sold you this land, the same company that has been systematically eliminating everyone who remembers the Redstone Treaty. The pieces began to fall into place in Caleb's mind, forming a picture he did not want to see. The land sold too cheaply. The advertisement in the newspaper that had found him in a town 300 miles away, despite his efforts to disappear. The 7 women hanged, but not killed, positioned perfectly along the route he would have to take to reach his new property. 3 years after the treaty was signed, Aida continued, a mining company discovered copper beneath Red Mesa, worth $10 million. Suddenly, our treaty land became very valuable to very powerful people. Ashford and his partners at Frontier Investment began a campaign to remove us. They declared the treaty invalid. They hired gunmen to burn our homes and poison our wells. They murdered our chiefs and made it look like accidents. And when we refused to leave, said Kiona, they decided to eliminate the last people who could prove the treaty existed. Us. The 7 women who witnessed our fathers and husbands sign it. The 7 women who know every word of that treaty by heart because we helped translate it. The 7 women who are the only remaining proof that this land does not belong to Frontier Investment. But why not just kill you? Caleb asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Muna smiled grimly. Because they needed someone to blame. Someone whose past would make the story believable. A disgraced cavalry officer with a history of violence against Apache people, a man who bought land in isolation and then discovered 7 Apache women on his property. Who could say what happened? Perhaps he killed them in a rage. Perhaps he was seeking revenge for some imagined slight. Either way, you would be the perfect scapegoat. And I would be dead before I could defend myself, Caleb finished. Precisely, Aida said. Ashford knows you are here. He arranged for you to be here. He knows that when you found us, you would either help us or abandon us. If you helped us, he could claim you were conspiring with rebels. If you abandoned us, we would die, and the last witnesses would be silenced. It was a trap with no escape. Except, I did not abandon you, Caleb said slowly, and you did not die. No, Kiona agreed, her eyes locked on his. We did not die. And now we have something Ashford did not anticipate. We have you, a cavalry officer who knows his tactics, who understands how he thinks, who has his own reasons to want justice. Caleb shook his head. I am not a soldier anymore. I gave that up 8 years ago, but you are still a man who knows right from wrong, said Aida, and you know that what happened at Blackwater Creek was wrong, just as you know what is happening now is wrong. The question is whether you will run from that knowledge again, or whether this time you will stand and fight. For a long moment, Caleb sat in silence, staring into the fire. The faces of the 67 dead rose in his memory like ghosts. Chief Kuruk, falling with Caleb's bullet in his chest. The women and children cut down in the crossfire, the smell of gunpowder and blood mixing with the desert dust. He had followed orders that day. He had done what he was told, and it had destroyed him more thoroughly than any bullet could have. "If I help you," he said finally, "you need to understand something. I cannot give you back what you lost. I cannot bring back the dead. All I can offer is the truth. And the truth is, I am the man who killed your husband," he said, looking at Aida. "I am the man who destroyed your people. How can you possibly trust me?" Aida met his gaze without flinching. "Because 8 years ago, after the shooting stopped, my daughter saw you. She was 15 years old, hiding in the rocks, and she saw you kneel beside my husband's body. She saw you weep. She saw you try to revive him even though he was already gone. She saw you scream at Ashford that this was murder, not war." She paused, her voice softening. "And she saw Ashford shoot you in the back and leave you for dead. You survived because one of your own men, a soldier named Hicks, found you and got you to a doctor, but officially you were discharged for health reasons. Unofficially, Ashford made sure you would never speak about what happened." Caleb closed his eyes, remembering the searing pain in his back, the taste of blood in his mouth, the certainty that he was dying. He had woken up 3 days later in a field hospital with a doctor telling him he would never serve again, and a letter of discharge that praised his service while destroying his career. "My daughter's name is Kiona," Aida said. "She is sitting across from you now, and she has lived for 8 years with the memory of her father's death. But she has also lived with the memory of your tears, with the knowledge that you tried to stop it, that you were punished for trying." Kiona leaned forward, and Caleb opened his eyes to look at her. "I will not lie to you," she said. "When I first saw your face in this cabin, I wanted to kill you. I have spent 8 years imagining that moment. But then I remembered what my father told me before he died. He said, 'Do not kill a man with a conscience. Turn him into a weapon.'" She reached into the folds of her dress and pulled out a piece of tanned hide, folded and refolded until it was small enough to fit in her palm. She unfolded it carefully, revealing a document covered in both English and Apache writing. At the bottom were 7 names in Apache script and 2 signatures in English. One belonged to Federal Agent Thomas Grayson. The other belonged to Captain Victor Ashford. "This is a copy of the Redstone Treaty," Kiona said. "The original was burned by Ashford 3 years ago, but my father made this copy the night after the signing. He hid it, and he told only 7 people where it was hidden. The 7 of us. This is why Ashford wants us dead, because as long as we live, as long as this copy exists, his claim to Red Mesa is a lie." Caleb took the hide carefully, his hands trembling slightly as he examined it. The treaty was clear and specific. 2,000 acres granted in perpetuity to the Apache people. Signed and witnessed. Legal and binding. If this came to light, Ashford would not just lose the land. He would face federal prosecution for fraud, for forgery, for conspiracy, for treason. "If we bring this forward," Caleb said slowly, "Ashford will do everything in his power to destroy it and everyone who has seen it. He controls the local sheriff. He has the support of a senator and a federal judge. He has money and men and influence." "Yes," Kiona agreed. "Which is why we cannot fight him through normal channels. We need to expose him publicly. Make the truth so visible that he cannot hide from it. We need to hold a trial in the court of public opinion before we ever set foot in a legal courtroom." "And you think I can help you do that?" Caleb asked. Aida smiled. "You already have. By saving us. By listening to us. By not running away. Ashford expected you to be predictable. But you have already proven him wrong. Now we will prove him wrong again. Together." Caleb looked at the 7 women around him. At Aida with her weathered wisdom. At Kiona with her fierce determination. At Muna, whose husband had been murdered. At Tala, who had been violated and silenced. At Istas, who carried new life in her womb. At Nara, who had lost her tongue, but not her courage. At Chenoa, who represented the future they were fighting for. They were not asking for revenge. They were asking for justice. And for the first time in 8 years, Caleb felt something he thought he had lost forever. Purpose. "All right," he said, "I will help you. Not because I can undo the past, but because maybe, just maybe, I can help build a better future." Kiona reached across the space between them and placed her hand over his. "Thank you," she said simply. That night, as the 7 women slept and the fire burned low, Caleb stood outside under the stars. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, dark and vast and indifferent to human suffering. But somewhere out there Ashford was planning his next move. Somewhere out there men with guns and money and power were preparing to finish what they had started. And Caleb Stone, the disgraced cavalry officer who had tried to disappear into the wilderness, knew that the war he thought he had escaped had found him anyway. The only question now was whether he would run from it again or stand and fight. He looked up at the stars, the same stars that had shone down on Blackwater Creek 8 years ago, the same stars that would shine tomorrow and the day after and long after he was gone. And he made a choice. This time he would not run. This time he would stand, not for redemption, not for forgiveness, but for the simple truth that some things were worth fighting for, even if you could never wash the blood from your hands. Inside the cabin, Kiona lay awake, her hand still tingling from where it had touched Caleb's. She had not told him everything. She had not told him that she had dreamed of his face for 8 years, that she had tracked his movements across 3 territories, that she had been the one to suggest to Aita that they could use him as a weapon against Ashford. She had not told him that when Ashford's men had captured them and strung them up to die, she had not been afraid, because she knew, somehow, that Caleb Stone would come, that the man who had wept over her father's body would not be able to ride past 7 dying women. She had gambled their lives on the belief that some part of the soldier who had tried to stop a massacre still existed inside the rancher who wanted to disappear. And she had been right. But now came the hard part. Now they had to survive what came next, and Kiona knew that Ashford would not stop until they were all dead. The question was whether Caleb Stone had enough fight left in him to match the enemy they now faced together. Outside, the desert wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of distant rain. Change was coming to Red Mesa. Change written in blood and tears, and the stubborn refusal of 7 women to die when they were supposed to. And at the center of it all, a man who had spent 8 years running from his past was about to discover that sometimes the only way forward was to turn and face what chased you. The 7 souls of Red Mesa had been given a second chance at life. Now they would fight for a chance at justice, and God help anyone who stood in their way. Dawn broke over Red Mesa with the kind of clarity that made everything sharp-edged and unforgiving. Caleb woke to find all 7 women already awake, sitting in a circle around the cold ashes of last night's fire. They were not speaking, but something in their silence felt deliberate, ritualistic. When Aita noticed him stirring, she gestured for him to join them. "What you are about to learn," she said, as he sat down awkwardly at the edge of their circle, "will determine whether you truly understand what we are fighting for. Each of us carries a piece of this story. Each of us has paid a price that Ashford thought would silence us forever. We need you to know that price, to understand that this is not just about land or treaties or legal documents. This is about lives. Real lives that were destroyed by men who saw us as obstacles rather than human beings." Caleb nodded slowly, sensing that whatever came next would be difficult to hear. "I am listening," he said. Aita looked at each woman in turn, and one by one they began to speak. Muna went first. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "My husband's name was Ashki. He was a warrior, yes, but he was also a father to our 2 children. 6 months ago, he went to the creek to check our fishing nets. He never came home. The sheriff said it was a snake bite, a tragic accident. But when I prepared his body for burial, I found the wound. It was not the mark of fangs. It was a puncture, clean and precise, like a needle. Someone had injected him with venom. Someone had made his murder look like nature's work." She paused, her jaw tightening. 3 weeks later, a man came to our home. His name was Cole Hennigan. He worked for Ashford. He told me that if I did not sign papers giving up our land rights, my children would suffer the same accident as their father. I refused. So he took my children to his employer as insurance. I have not seen them in 5 months. They are alive, Ashford has assured me of that much, but only as long as I remain silent. Caleb felt his stomach turn. Children. Ashford was holding children hostage. Where are they being kept, he asked. Muna shook her head. I do not know. Hennigan blindfolded me when he took me to see them once, 2 months ago. It was a house, a large house, but I could not tell you where. All I know is that my babies called for me when I had to leave, and I could do nothing. The next to speak was Tala. She was younger than Muna, perhaps 27, and when she began her story, she stared at the ground rather than meeting anyone's eyes. Her voice was barely above a whisper. 1 year ago, I went to town to buy medicine for my grandmother. It was late afternoon when I finished my business, and Sheriff Dalton offered to escort me home. He said the roads were not safe for a woman alone. I believed him. I trusted the law. She stopped, her breathing becoming uneven. Caleb knew what was coming, and rage began to build in his chest. He did not take me home, Tala continued. He took me to the jail. He said there had been a complaint about me stealing, that he needed to hold me until it could be investigated. There was no complaint. There was only him and an empty cell and a locked door. Her hands moved to her stomach, an unconscious, protective gesture. When he was finished with me, he told me that if I spoke of it to anyone, he would arrest my entire family for conspiracy against the government. He would see them hanged. So I said nothing. But my body would not let me forget. 2 months later, I realized I was carrying his child. Aida reached over and took Tala's hand. The baby, she said gently, when Tala seemed unable to continue. I lost it, Tala whispered. When Ashford's men captured us and beat us before the hanging, I lost it. Perhaps that is a mercy. I do not know. I only know that Dalton took everything from me, and the law did nothing because he is the law. Caleb's hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles went white. Dalton, he said, his voice low and dangerous. He is on Ashford's payroll. He is on the list in the Black Ledger, Aida confirmed. $800 to look the other way, to arrest anyone who questions Frontier Investments' claims, to ensure that justice always favors the powerful. The fourth woman, Istas, spoke next. She was visibly pregnant now that the loose clothing could not hide her condition. Unlike the others, her voice held a strange kind of peace, as though she had already accepted whatever fate awaited her. My husband died 4 months ago, she said. His name was Takala, and he was a healer like me. He knew plants and their properties better than anyone I have ever known. One morning he went to gather herbs in the hills. He did not return. They found his body at the bottom of a cliff. The sheriff said he had fallen while climbing, but Takala had climbed those rocks since he was a boy. He would not have fallen. She placed both hands on her swollen belly. This child is all I have left of him. I am 6 months along now. When Ashford's men hanged us, they knew I was pregnant. They did not care, or perhaps they cared very much. Perhaps they thought that killing an unborn child along with its mother would send a message about the cost of resistance. But I did not die, she continued, and neither did my baby. We survived, and when this child is born, I will tell him or her about their father, about a good man who was murdered for knowing too much and caring too much. And I will tell them that their life, their very existence, is an act of defiance against those who wanted us erased from history. Nara was next, and her story was told not with words, but with writing. She pulled out a small piece of charcoal and a flat stone and began to write in careful English letters. Caleb read aloud as she wrote. 2 years ago, Ashford's men came to my home at night. They wanted to know where the treaty copy was hidden. I told them I did not know. This was true. At that time, only Aida knew its location, but they did not believe me, so they held me down, and one of them took a knife. Nara paused in her writing, her hand shaking. Then she pulled down the cloth that covered her lower face, revealing the scar tissue where her tongue had once been. "They cut it out," Caleb said, horror and fury mixing in his voice. "They cut out your tongue so you could not speak of what you knew." Nara nodded and continued writing. They thought silence would protect their secrets, but they were wrong. "I learned to write in English. I learned to communicate in ways they never imagined. My voice may be gone, but my testimony remains. And when the time comes, I will write down every detail of what they did to me, every face I remember, every word they said. The law may not listen to a tongueless Apache woman, but the people will read my words, and they will know." The sixth woman, Chenoa, was the youngest at 20. When she spoke, there was a fire in her eyes that reminded Caleb of soldiers half her age facing their first battle with more courage than sense. "I have no husband to mourn, no children stolen, no body violated," she said. "My crime is simply being young, being the future they want to prevent. Ashford's men told me before they put the rope around my neck that I was a waste, that I would never marry, never have children, never grow old. They wanted me to die knowing that the future of our people died with me." She leaned forward, her voice rising with intensity. "But I am still here. I am still breathing. I am still young and alive and full of fight. And I will have children someday, and they will grow up on land that belongs to us. And Ashford and his kind will be nothing but a shameful memory that we teach our children to never repeat." Finally, Aita herself spoke. Her voice carried the weight of all the others, as though she bore not just her own pain, but the collective suffering of her people. "I have told you how my husband died," she said to Caleb. "What I have not told you is what happened after. Ashford came to me personally 3 days after the massacre. He offered me money, a substantial sum, enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life if I would sign a statement saying that Chief Kuruk had attacked first, that the cavalry had acted in self-defense, that the treaty had been signed under duress and was therefore invalid." She smiled bitterly. I refused. So he made a different offer. He would allow the surviving members of our community to stay on a small portion of the land, 50 acres instead of 2,000, if I would simply stop talking about the treaty, stop teaching our children about their rights, stop being a memory keeper for our people. "And you refused again," Caleb said. "I told him that memory is the one thing you cannot kill with bullets or money or threats. I told him that as long as one person remembers, the truth survives. So he decided to eliminate all of us who remember, the 7 women who carry the treaty in our hearts, who can recite it word for word, who will not let it be forgotten." The circle fell silent. Outside, the sun had fully risen, and the desert was coming alive with heat and light. But inside the cabin, the air felt heavy with the weight of injustice, with the accumulated pain of lives destroyed by greed and cruelty. Caleb looked at each woman in turn, at Muna, whose children were held hostage, at Tala, who had been violated and traumatized, at Istas, who carried life in her womb despite everything, at Nara, who had been mutilated, at Chenoa, who refused to let youth be wasted, at Aita, who bore the burden of memory, and at Kiona, who had not yet told her own story. "What about you?" he asked Kiona. "What did they take from you?" Kiona's eyes met his, and for a moment he saw past the fierce warrior to the grieving daughter beneath. "They took my father," she said simply. "They took my childhood. They took 8 years of my life that I spent in rage and pain and dreams of revenge. But they also gave me something. They gave me purpose. They showed me exactly what kind of men run this world, and they made me determined to change it." She stood up, and the others rose with her. "Now you know what we are fighting for," she said to Caleb. "Not just land, not just a piece of paper, but the right to exist, the right to be seen as human beings rather than obstacles, the right to have our pain acknowledged and our losses counted, the right to justice." Caleb stood as well, his mind racing with everything he had heard. These women were not just victims. They were warriors in their own right, each one carrying a weapon that Ashford had not anticipated. Muna carried the fierce love of a mother. Tala carried the quiet strength of a survivor. Istus carried hope in the form of new life. Nara carried the power of written truth. Genoa carried the defiance of youth. Aida carried the weight of history. And Kiona carried something that frightened Caleb more than anything else. She carried the ability to turn pain into action. "We need to plan," he said. "Ashford will not wait long before making his next move. He knows I found you. He knows you are still alive. He will come for us." "Let him come," Muna said coldly. "We are ready to fight." "No," Caleb said firmly. "Not yet. If we fight now on his terms, we will lose. Ashford has men, money, and the law on his side. What we have is the truth and the element of surprise. We need to use both." "What do you propose?" Aida asked. Caleb began to pace, his military training reasserting itself as he thought through the tactical situation. "We need 3 things. First, we need the Black Ledger, the book that contains records of all Ashford's bribes and illegal transactions. Without it, we have your testimony, but no documentary proof of the conspiracy. Second, we need Agent Grayson. He is the federal witness to the treaty. If he is still alive and we can get him to testify, his word carries legal weight that ours does not. Third, we need to make all of this public before Ashford can silence us. A trial in the court of public opinion before we ever set foot in a legal courtroom." Kiona nodded slowly. "The Black Ledger will be in Ashford's office at the Frontier Bank. That building is guarded day and night." "Then we will need to go at night," Caleb said, "and we will need to be smart about it. This is not a smash and grab. This is a surgical operation. We get in, find the ledger, and get out without being seen." "And Grayson?" Aida asked. "If he is still alive, Ashford will have him under guard somewhere, probably at his estate. That will be harder to infiltrate, but not impossible. We will need to split up. One team goes for the ledger, another searches for Grayson." "I will lead the team to the bank," Kiona said immediately. "No," Caleb countered. "You will come with me to the bank. Muna and Nura will search for Grayson. Aita and Tala will stay here and protect the treaty. Istas and Chenoa will prepare supplies and escape routes in case we need to run." Chenoa looked offended. "I am not staying behind to pack bags. I can fight." "I know you can," Caleb said gently. "But if something goes wrong, if we are all captured or killed, someone needs to survive to tell the story. You and Istas are our insurance. You are the future we are fighting for." Chenoa wanted to argue, but Aida placed a hand on her shoulder. "He is right, child. Every warrior has a role. Ours is to survive and remember." "When do we move?" Muna asked. "Tonight," Caleb said. "Ashford will expect us to take time to plan, to gather resources. He will not expect us to strike immediately. Speed is our advantage." The day passed in tense preparation. Caleb checked and rechecked his weapons. The women fashioned tools from what little they had, Nara sharpening a knife with practiced efficiency, Kiona crafting a simple bow from wood and cord. As evening approached, they gathered one final time. "Before we do this," Aida said, "I need you all to understand something. We may not survive this night. Ashford's men are trained killers. We are healers, mothers, daughters. We are not soldiers, but we are Apache," Kiona said fiercely. "We are the daughters of warriors. We are the women who survived hanging. We are already ghosts, and ghosts cannot be killed twice." There was something in her words that sent a chill down Caleb's spine. He had fought in wars. He had seen men charge into impossible odds, but he had never seen determination quite like this. These women were not fighting for glory or duty or orders. They were fighting for the simple right to exist. And that made them more dangerous than any trained soldier. As darkness fell, the teams prepared to move out. Caleb pulled Kiona aside before they left. "If something goes wrong," he said quietly, "if I am captured or killed, you need to promise me something. Get the others out. Do not try to save me. Do not risk the treaty for my life." Kiona looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "Why would you think I would try to save you?" she asked. "Because 8 years ago, someone tried to save me when they should not have," Caleb said. "A soldier named Hicks pulled me out when Ashford left me for dead. He risked a court-martial to do it. He thought my life was worth saving. I need to know that you will not make the same mistake." Kiona was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You are not a mistake, Caleb Stone. You are a tool, a weapon, and I will use you until you are no longer useful. After that you may die with whatever honor you can salvage, but not before." Her words should have stung, but instead Caleb felt something like relief. She was not sentimental. She would not let emotion cloud judgment. "Good," he said. "That is what I needed to hear." They moved out as the moon rose, two groups heading in different directions into the night. Caleb, Kiona, Muna, and Nara made for the town of Red Mesa, 5 miles distant. The streets were quiet when they arrived, most honest folk already asleep, and the dishonest ones gathering in the saloons. The Frontier Bank stood on the main street, a 2-story building of brick and wood with barred windows and a heavy door. 2 guards stood outside, rifles in hand. Caleb watched them from the shadows, counting their movements, noting their patterns. Every 20 minutes, they walked a circuit around the building. That gave a window of perhaps 3 minutes to get inside. Nara moved like liquid shadow, circling to the back of the building where a 2nd-story window overlooked an alley. She produced a thin wire from her dress and began working at the window lock. Her fingers moved with the skill of someone who had done this before. Within 2 minutes, the window swung open silently. Caleb boosted Kiona up first, then pulled himself through. They found themselves in a storage room filled with file boxes and old furniture. The door to the hallway was unlocked, and they slipped through into the darkened interior of the bank. Ashford's office was on the 2nd floor at the end of a long hallway. The door was locked, but Caleb had anticipated this. He pulled a small pry bar from his belt and wedged it into the doorframe. The wood splintered with a crack that sounded impossibly loud in the silence. They froze, listening for any reaction from below. Nothing. Inside the office, moonlight streaming through the window illuminated a large desk, filing cabinets, and a safe built into the wall. The black ledger would be in the safe. Caleb knelt in front of it, examining the lock. It was a good one, better than he could pick with his limited skills. "We need to find the combination," he whispered to Kiona. "Check the desk." They rifled through drawers, searching for anything that might give them a clue. Kiona found a small notebook filled with numbers and codes. She held it up to the moonlight, squinting at the cramped handwriting. "Try this sequence," she said, reading off a series of numbers. Caleb spun the dial carefully. Click, click, click. The safe door swung open. Inside were stacks of cash, property deeds, and a thick leather-bound book. Caleb pulled out the book and opened it. Page after page of names, dates, and amounts. Bribes paid to Sheriff Dalton, payments to Judge Morrison, money sent to Senator Blackwell, and a special section labeled Project Red Mesa Partners, listing Ashford, the senator, and the judge as co-owners of the land theft scheme. "This is it," Caleb breathed. "This is everything we need." Then a voice spoke from the doorway, cold and familiar. "I rather thought you might come for that." Caleb spun around. Colonel Victor Ashford stood in the doorway, a pistol in his hand. Behind him were 4 armed men. "Hello, Stone," Ashford said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "It has been a long time. I must say, you look well for a dead man." Caleb's hand moved toward his own gun, but Ashford shook his head. "I would not. My men are faster than you, and I would hate to kill you before we have had a chance to talk." "How did you know we would be here?" Kiona demanded. Ashford's smile widened. "I have been planning this for months. Do you really think I did not anticipate every move you might make? I sold Stone his land. I arranged for you to be hanged in a place where he would find you. I left enough clues to lead you to the treaty, and I made sure the Black Ledger was right where you would look for it. Everything has gone exactly according to plan." Caleb felt ice water flood his veins. "This is a trap. It has always been a trap." "Of course it is," Ashford agreed. "You see, I need to discredit you completely before I kill you. It is not enough to simply eliminate you. I need the world to believe that you were criminals, thieves who broke into a bank, rebels who attacked innocent civilians. That way, when you die as villains, and no one will question it." He gestured with his pistol. "Now, you are going to come with me quietly. If you resist, I will have my men burn down Stone's cabin with the other women inside. I have already sent a team there. They are waiting for my signal. Cooperate, and I let them live. Refuse, and you all die tonight." Caleb and Kiona exchanged a glance. They were outgunned and outmaneuvered. But as Caleb looked into Kiona's eyes, he saw something that gave him hope. She was not afraid. She was calculating. And then he understood. This was not the end of the plan. This was part of it. "Very well," Caleb said, raising his hands. "We will come quietly." As Ashford's men moved forward to bind their wrists, Caleb noticed Kiona's hand slip into her dress. A moment later, there was a soft snap, a hidden cord, a signal. And in that moment, Caleb realized that these women had been planning far longer than he had, that they had anticipated being captured, that they had contingencies he had not even imagined. The question was whether those contingencies would be enough to save them. Outside the bank, Nara had watched the ambush unfold from her hiding place. When Kiona gave the signal, Nara moved. She did not run to help, because that was not the plan. Instead, she ran toward the edge of town, where Muna was waiting with the horses. They had failed to get the ledger, but they had learned something more valuable. They had learned that Ashford was afraid. Afraid enough to spring his trap early, afraid enough to reveal his hand. And fear, Nara knew, was a weakness that could be exploited. As Ashford marched Caleb and Kiona out of the bank at gunpoint, Nara and Muna were already riding hard for the cabin, racing against time to warn the others. The night was far from over, and the real battle was about to begin. The ride to Ashford's estate took 30 minutes through the cold desert night. Caleb and Kiona sat in the back of a wagon, their hands bound, surrounded by armed men. Ashford rode ahead on horseback, occasionally glancing back, as if to ensure his prizes had not somehow vanished into the darkness. Neither captive spoke. There was nothing to say that would not give away what they both understood. The capture had been anticipated. The plan had accounted for this possibility. Now they simply had to survive long enough for the rest of it to unfold. The estate appeared as a cluster of lights in the distance, growing larger as they approached. It was impressive by frontier standards, a 2-story house with wide verandas, surrounded by smaller buildings that served as barracks, stables, and storage. Lanterns burned in several windows despite the late hour. Ashford clearly kept a staff that worked through the night. As they pulled into the courtyard, Caleb counted at least a dozen men moving about the grounds. Guards, ranch hands, or hired guns, he could not tell. But all were armed. The odds were not good. But then, the odds had not been good since the moment he cut down 7 women from their hanging ropes. Ashford dismounted and gestured for his men to bring the prisoners inside. They were marched through a grand entrance hall, decorated with expensive furniture and paintings that seemed obscene in their luxury compared to the poverty of the Apache families Ashford had displaced. Down a hallway, through a heavy door, into a basement that had been converted into a cell block. 3 cells lined one wall, each with iron bars and heavy locks. 2 were empty. The third contained a figure hunched on a narrow cot, so still that at first Caleb thought it might be a corpse. Then the figure raised its head, and Caleb saw the face of an old man, gaunt and bearded, with eyes that still held a spark of defiance. "Agent Grayson," Ashford said pleasantly, "you have visitors. Allow me to introduce Caleb Stone, formerly Lieutenant Stone of the 7th Cavalry, and Kiona, daughter of the late Chief Kuruk. They have come to rescue you, I am afraid. Quite touching, really." The old man struggled to his feet, chains rattling at his ankles. "Stone," he said, his voice rough with disuse. I know that name. You were at Blackwater Creek. You tried to stop it." "I failed," Caleb said quietly. "But you tried," Grayson insisted. "That matters." Ashford laughed. "How moving." The conscience-stricken soldier and the imprisoned federal agent finding common ground. "Unfortunately, your shared nobility will not save either of you. By morning, you will all be dead, and this little rebellion will be over." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Stone, in case you were hoping your other Apache friends might attempt some heroic rescue, let me put your mind at rest. I have already sent men to your cabin. By now, they have either captured or killed everyone there. Either way, you have lost." The door slammed shut. A lock turned. Footsteps receded up the stairs. Kiona immediately moved to the bars of their cell and examined the lock. It was heavy iron, old but well-maintained. She pulled a thin wire from her hair, a tool Nara had fashioned for her, and began working at the mechanism. "Will that work?" Caleb asked. "Eventually," Kiona said without looking up, "but we may not have eventually. We need to assume Nara reached the others in time. We need to assume they escaped. And we need to assume they are coming." "A lot of assumptions," Caleb observed. "Do you have a better plan?" Before Caleb could answer, Grayson spoke from the neighboring cell. "The girl is right. Ashford will not wait long. He wants us dead before dawn, before anyone in town might notice unusual activity out here. That gives us perhaps 4 hours. Can you walk?" Caleb asked the old man. Grayson rattled his chains. "Not far, not fast. But I can move if necessary." "How long have you been down here?" Kiona asked. 3 years, Grayson said. "Give or take a few months. I lost count after the first year. Ashford has kept me alive because he feared that if I died, someone might investigate. Better to keep me imprisoned and tell anyone who asks that I retired to the east. 3 years in a cell." Caleb could not imagine the strength it took to survive that and still have fight left. "You signed the Redstone Treaty," he said. "You witnessed it." "I did," Grayson confirmed. "It was legal and binding. When Ashford began his campaign to invalidate it, I tried to report him to Washington. He intercepted my letters. When I tried to travel to deliver my report in person, his men ambushed me on the road. I woke up in this cell. I have been here ever since." The wire in Kiona's hands made a soft clicking sound. "Almost," she murmured. "Almost." Then came a noise from upstairs, shouting. The crack of gunfire, the sound of running feet. Caleb moved to the small window at the top of their cell. He could see nothing but darkness and the occasional flash of muzzle fire. "Someone is attacking the house," he said. Kiona's face broke into a fierce smile. "They came. I knew they would come." The lock on their cell clicked open. Kiona pulled the door wide and immediately moved to Grayson's cell, working on that lock as well. More gunfire erupted above them, closer now. Voices shouted orders, glass shattered. Grayson's cell door swung open. The old man stepped out, swaying slightly, and Caleb caught his arm. "Can you make it up the stairs?" "I will crawl if I have to," Grayson said grimly. They moved toward the door to the basement, but before they reached it, the door burst open. A man stumbled down the stairs, blood streaming from a wound in his shoulder. He saw them and tried to raise his rifle, but Caleb was faster. He crossed the distance in 3 strides and struck the man in the throat. The guard went down, gasping. Caleb took the rifle and the man's pistol. He handed the pistol to Kiona. "Stay behind me," he said, "and keep Grayson safe." They climbed the stairs into chaos. The grand entrance hall was filled with smoke and the smell of gunpowder. Bodies lay on the floor, some moving, some not. Through the haze, Caleb saw figures moving with deadly purpose. Apache women, armed with bows and knives and stolen guns, fighting with the fury of people who had nothing left to lose. Aida stood near the front door, a rifle in her hands, firing with careful precision. Muna fought hand-to-hand with a guard twice her size, her knife finding the gaps in his defense. Tala moved through the smoke like a ghost, appearing behind guards and cutting them down before they knew she was there. Even Chenoa was there, her young face set with determination as she fired arrows with startling accuracy. But it was Istus who shocked Caleb most. The pregnant healer stood in the center of the hall, a pistol in each hand, firing at anyone who threatened her sisters. Her belly was large now, impossible to miss, and yet she moved with a kind of serene fearlessness. "Caleb!" Aida shouted when she saw him. "Get Grayson to the wagon. We are leaving." "Where is Nara?" Kiona called out. "Here!" The tongueless woman appeared from a side hallway, dragging an ornate wooden box. She set it down and pulled it open, revealing stacks of documents. Grayson stumbled forward and looked inside. His face went pale. "My God," he breathed. "These are my original reports to Washington. All of them. 3 years' worth of evidence against Ashford. He kept them. The fool actually kept them as insurance." "Take it all," Aida ordered. "We leave nothing that can be destroyed." More guards were pouring in from the barracks outside. The women were skilled and determined, but they were outnumbered. Caleb took position at the door, firing the rifle in controlled bursts, buying time for the others to gather what they needed. Then a voice cut through the chaos like a knife. "Enough!" Colonel Victor Ashford stood at the top of the grand staircase, a pistol in one hand and a torch in the other. Behind him stood Sheriff Dalton and a man Caleb recognized from newspaper photographs as Senator Blackwell. All three were armed. "You have made a terrible mistake," Ashford said. "Did you think you could assault my home and simply walk away? Did you think I would not be prepared for this exact scenario?" He raised the torch higher. "This entire house is soaked in lamp oil. One spark and it all burns. You will burn with it. Unless you surrender now, put down your weapons, release Grayson, and I will let you die quickly instead of slowly." Aida lowered her rifle slightly, not in surrender, but in consideration. She looked at Ashford with the calm of someone who had already accepted death. "You will kill us regardless," she said, "whether we surrender or fight. So we choose to fight." Ashford's face twisted with rage. "So be it." He dropped the torch. But the torch never hit the ground. A shot rang out and the torch spun away, its flame extinguished as it tumbled through the air. Ashford stumbled back, a red stain spreading across his shoulder. In the doorway stood an old man in a U.S. Marshal's uniform, a smoking rifle in his hands. Behind him were 20 federal marshals, all armed, all pointing their weapons at Ashford and his men. "Colonel Victor Ashford," the marshal said, his voice carrying the weight of federal authority, "you are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, kidnapping, and attempted murder of a federal agent. Sheriff Dalton, Senator Blackwell, you are also under arrest as co-conspirators." Ashford stared in disbelief. "How did you know?" The marshal smiled grimly. "Because Agent Thomas Grayson was smart enough to set up a failsafe before he came to investigate you 3 years ago. He gave his sister in Boston a sealed package with instructions. If he failed to send her a coded telegram every 6 months, she was to deliver the package to my office. It contained copies of all his evidence against you, witness statements, and a detailed account of his investigation. When his telegrams stopped coming 2.5 years ago, his sister waited the full 6 months as instructed, then brought everything to us. It took us another year to verify it all and build an airtight case. But now we have it. And you have nowhere to run. But we can still make a deal," Senator Blackwell said quickly, his politician's instincts taking over. "Surely we can negotiate." "There will be no deals," a new voice said. Judge Margaret O'Connor stepped through the door behind the marshals. She was a severe woman in her 50s, known throughout the territory as the only judge Ashford's money could not buy. "I have reviewed the evidence brought to me by these courageous women and by Agent Grayson's recovered documents. I have issued warrants for all of you. You will stand trial in federal court, and I will personally ensure that justice is served." Ashford looked around wildly, searching for an escape. His men were already surrendering, dropping their weapons at the sight of federal authority. Dalton had gone pale, his hands trembling. The senator looked as though he might vomit. For a long moment it seemed Ashford might try to fight anyway. His hand tightened on his pistol. But then his eyes met Caleb's across the room, and something in Ashford's expression changed. It was the look of a man who had finally realized he had lost. Not just this battle, but everything. His wealth, his power, his future. The pistol fell from his hand and clattered on the stairs. The marshals moved in, placing shackles on Ashford, Dalton, and Blackwell. As they led the three men away, Ashford stopped beside Caleb. "You should have died at Blackwater Creek," he said quietly. "I should have made sure, but you did not," Caleb replied. "And that was your first mistake. Your second was underestimating these women. Your third was thinking that justice could be buried forever." "Nothing is forever," Ashford said bitterly. "You will see. Men like me always find a way back." "Not this time," Aida said, stepping forward. "This time, the world is watching. This time, there are too many witnesses. This time, you lose." As the marshals took Ashford away, the women gathered in the ruined entrance hall. They were bruised, bloodied, exhausted. But they were alive, and they had won. "Marshal," Kiona said to the officer in charge, "there is one more thing. Ashford has been holding 2 children hostage, Muna's son and daughter. We need to find them." The marshal nodded. "We will search the entire property. If they are here, we will find them." It took an hour, but the children were found locked in a storage shed behind the main house. When Muna saw them, she collapsed to her knees, gathering them into her arms and weeping. The children clung to her, crying and asking if the bad men were gone. "They are gone," Muna promised through her tears. "They are gone, and they will never hurt you again." 3 months later, the federal courthouse in Tucson was packed with spectators. People had come from across the territory to witness what was being called the trial of the century. The charges against Ashford, Dalton, Blackwell, and 12 other co-conspirators filled 3 pages of legal documentation: fraud, conspiracy, kidnapping, murder, attempted murder, assault, bribery, forgery of federal documents, and treason. The prosecution presented the Black Ledger, meticulously documented by Ashford himself in his arrogance. They presented Grayson's reports, recovered from Ashford's house. They presented the copy of the Redstone Treaty, verified as authentic by handwriting experts. And most powerfully, they presented witnesses. Aida testified about the treaty signing and the subsequent campaign of terror. Muna testified about her husband's murder and her children's kidnapping. Tala testified about her assault by Sheriff Dalton, her voice shaking but clear as she faced her attacker in open court. Istas testified about her husband's murder while visibly pregnant, a living symbol of what Ashford had tried to destroy. Nara could not speak, but her written testimony was read aloud by a court clerk, every brutal detail of her mutilation laid bare for the jury to hear. Chenoa testified about the systematic elimination of young Apache people, the deliberate attempt to prevent a future generation. And Grayson, frail but determined, testified about the legal validity of the treaty and Ashford's deliberate conspiracy to void it. But it was Kiona's testimony that broke the case wide open. She stood before the jury and spoke for 2 hours, outlining not just what had been done to her people, but why. She explained how the discovery of copper had transformed their land from worthless desert into valuable real estate. She explained how Ashford had systematically purchased influence, buying a sheriff, a judge, and a senator. She explained how he had orchestrated the Blackwater Creek massacre to create a justification for voiding the treaty. And then she called Caleb Stone to the stand. Caleb had not wanted to testify. The idea of speaking publicly about Blackwater Creek, of admitting his role in it, filled him with dread. But Kiona had insisted. "The jury needs to hear from someone on the inside," she had said, "someone who knows how Ashford operates, someone who can explain that even his own men were victims of his manipulation." So Caleb took the stand and told the truth. All of it. All. He testified about the orders to attack a peaceful Apache camp, about his objections and Ashford's threats, about the massacre itself and his attempt to report it afterward, about being shot and left for dead when he refused to stay silent. When he finished, the courtroom was silent. Even the judge looked shaken. The defense tried to discredit the witnesses, tried to argue that the treaty had been invalid from the start, tried to paint the Apache women as rebels who had brought this upon themselves. But the evidence was overwhelming. The Black Ledger alone would have been enough to convict. Combined with everything else, the verdict was never in doubt. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman read the verdict in a steady voice. Guilty on all counts. Judge O'Connor sentenced Ashford to death by hanging. Senator Blackwell received 20 years in federal prison. Judge Morrison, who had been revealed as a co-conspirator, received 15 years and was permanently disbarred. Sheriff Dalton received life in prison for his crimes, including the assault on Tala. But the most important ruling came after the criminal verdicts. Judge O'Connor issued a federal order recognizing the Redstone Treaty as valid and legally binding. The 2,000 acres of Red Mesa were returned to the Apache people. Frontier Investment Company was dissolved, its assets seized to pay restitution, and a federal investigation was launched into similar land frauds across the territory. 6 months after the trial, Caleb stood on a hillside overlooking Red Mesa and watched as new homes rose from the ground. The Apache community had returned, swelling from the scattered survivors to nearly 200 people as families who had been displaced came back to reclaim their heritage. 7 houses had been built first, one for each of the women who had survived the hanging. Aita's home was the largest, serving as a community gathering place. Muna lived there with her children, who were thriving now that the shadow of fear had lifted. Tala had started a school teaching both Apache and English to the children. Istas had given birth to a healthy son she named Kuruk, after the chief whose death had started this entire chain of events. Nara had become the official record keeper for the community, her written accounts preserved as a testament to everything they had endured and overcome. Chenoa was studying to become a teacher alongside Tala, her youthful energy channeled into building the future she had been told she would never see. And Kiona had become something of a leader herself, representing the community in dealings with the territorial government. It was Kiona who found Caleb on the hillside that spring afternoon. She climbed up to where he stood and settled beside him, looking out over the valley. "You are brooding again," she observed. "I am thinking," Caleb corrected. About whether I belong here. I helped you get justice. The treaty is recognized. Ashford is dead. The others are in prison. Maybe it is time for me to move on." Kiona was quiet for a moment. "Where would you go?" "I do not know. Somewhere I have not ruined. Somewhere my past does not follow." "Your past will follow you anywhere," Kiona said. "That is the nature of the past. The question is whether you will let it define you." Caleb looked at her. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that you are part of this community now, whether you like it or not. Aita considers you an honorary son. Muna's children call you uncle. Tala trusts you. Even Nara, who has no reason to trust any white man, writes favorably of you in her chronicles." "And you?" Caleb asked. "What do you think of me?" Kiona smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "I think you are a fool if you believe you can just walk away from this, from us, from what we built together." She stood up and offered him her hand. "Come. Aita is preparing a feast tonight. The whole community will be there. You should be there too." Caleb took her hand and let her pull him to his feet. As they walked down the hillside together, he noticed that her hand remained in his, warm and calloused and strong. Over the following months, Caleb found himself drawn deeper into the life of the community. He helped build houses and dig wells. He taught some of the young men military discipline and tactics, not for war, but for hunting and protection. He learned more Apache words and customs, and slowly, almost without noticing, he stopped thinking about leaving. It was Aita who finally confronted him about it. She found him one evening sitting by the river, watching the sunset. "You love her," the old woman said without preamble. Caleb did not pretend to misunderstand. "I have no right to love her. I killed her father." "Yes," Aita agreed. "You did, and she has chosen to forgive you. The question is whether you can forgive yourself." I do not know how, Caleb admitted. Aida sat down beside him. Let me tell you something about my daughter. When Kuruk died, she was 15 years old. For the next 8 years, she lived for one purpose only: revenge. She tracked your movements across 3 territories. She learned everything about you, where you went, what you did, who you talked to. She was preparing to kill you. Caleb felt his stomach drop. I did not know. No one did, Aida continued. But then something changed. She began to see that you were not the monster she had imagined. You were a man who had made terrible choices under impossible circumstances. A man who had tried to do the right thing and been punished for it. A man who, despite everything, still tried to help others. She paused, looking out at the river. When Ashford hanged us, Kiona knew exactly what to do. She knew you would find us because she had studied you long enough to predict your movements. She knew you would help us because she understood your guilt. And she knew that together you and we could bring down the man responsible for so much pain. So I was just a tool, Caleb said bitterly. A weapon she manipulated. At first, yes, Aida admitted, but somewhere along the way, you became more than that. You became someone she trusted, someone she respected, and eventually, someone she loved. The question is what you will do with that gift. Before Caleb could answer, Kiona herself appeared on the riverbank. She looked between her mother and Caleb, then smiled knowingly. Scheming again, Mother? Always, Aida said cheerfully. She stood and patted Caleb on the shoulder. Think about what I said. And remember, life is too short to waste on guilt when love is available. She walked away, leaving Caleb and Kiona alone by the river. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the water flow past. Your mother says I love you, Caleb said finally. My mother is very wise, Kiona replied. She also says you tracked me for 8 years planning to kill me. That is also true. And now? Kiona turned to face him, her expression serious. Now I think that killing you would have been a waste. You are worth more alive than dead. You are a good man who made bad choices. You are a warrior who fights for justice. You are someone who sees my people as human beings rather than obstacles. And you are someone I would very much like to kiss if you will stop talking long enough to let me. Caleb stared at her in shock. Then, slowly, he smiled. It was the first genuine smile he had worn in 8 years. I think I can manage that, he said. Their kiss was gentle and tentative, 2 people scarred by violence finding tenderness in each other. When they pulled apart, Kiona rested her forehead against his. I cannot give you absolution for what happened at Blackwater Creek, she whispered. I cannot erase the past or bring back the dead, but I can give you a future if you want it. I want it, Caleb said, more than anything. 1 year later, in the summer of 1879, Caleb Stone and Kiona were married beneath the old oak tree where she and 6 other women had once hung from ropes. The tree had been transformed with flowers and ribbons, its dark history acknowledged but not allowed to define its future. Aida performed the ceremony, speaking in both Apache and English so that everyone present could understand. The whole community attended, nearly 300 people now, as more families returned to Red Mesa. Federal Agent Grayson was there, retired now, but healthy and sharp-minded. Marshal Dixon attended as well, having become a friend to the community. Even some of the townspeople from Red Mesa came, those who had stood up during the public trial and demanded justice. As Caleb and Kiona exchanged their vows, Muna stood beside them with her children. Tala was there with her students from the school. Istas held little Kuruk, who gurgled happily through the ceremony. Nara had written a special blessing that was read aloud. Chenoa stood as one of Kiona's attendants, her youth and optimism a reminder of why they had fought so hard. When the ceremony concluded and Caleb kissed his wife, the community erupted in cheers. A feast followed that lasted into the night, with music and dancing and stories told around fires. Late in the evening, when most people had retired to their homes, Caleb and Kiona walked up to the hillside where they had first talked about the future. Below them, Red Mesa spread out in all directions, dotted with lights from homes and campfires. "Are you happy?" Kiona asked. Caleb thought about everything that had happened. The massacre at Blackwater Creek, the years of running and hiding, finding the 7 women, the fight against Ashford, the trial, the rebuilding. All of it had led to this moment, standing on this hill with this woman, looking out over land that had been saved from greed and corruption. "I am happy," he said, "more than I ever thought possible. But I am also scared." "Of what?" "Of failing you, of not being worthy of this second chance." Kiona took his hands in hers. "Listen to me carefully," she said. "You will fail sometimes. You will make mistakes. You will have days when the ghosts of Blackwater Creek haunt you. That is unavoidable, but you will not face those days alone. You will face them with me, with our community, with our family." "Our family," Caleb repeated. "We are going to have a family?" Kiona smiled and placed his hand on her belly. "We already do. I am 2 months along." Caleb felt tears spring to his eyes. He dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to her stomach as if he might hear the heartbeat of his child through her skin. "I will protect you," he whispered to the life growing inside her. "I will give you a better world than the one I inherited. I promise." When he stood up, Kiona was crying too. "They are happy tears," she said when he looked concerned. "I did not think I could cry happy tears anymore, but you have given me that gift." They stood together on the hillside as the night deepened and the stars emerged overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. From the valley below came the sound of laughter and music, and Caleb Stone, the man who had thought his life ended at Blackwater Creek, understood that it had actually been waiting to begin. 5 years passed. Tala, who had testified so bravely against Sheriff Dalton, found peace in her school. She never married, choosing instead to pour her love into the children she taught. On quiet evenings, she would write in her journal, documenting the healing journey that had taken her from victim to survivor to teacher. Her students called her the woman who turned pain into wisdom. Nara, despite her inability to speak, became the community's most powerful voice. Her written chronicles were copied and distributed across the territory, teaching others about Apache culture, history, and the fight for justice. She married a young man from a neighboring Apache community, and together they raised 2 children who learned to sign before they could speak. Chenoa fulfilled her promise to become a teacher. Working alongside Tala, she specialized in teaching Apache traditions to the youngest children, ensuring that the old ways would not be forgotten even as the community adapted to the modern world. At 25, she was already training the next generation of teachers. Red Mesa flourished. The community grew to over 500 people as word spread that there was a place where Apache people could live freely on their own land. The school expanded. A clinic was built with Istas as the head healer. A trading post opened that did fair business with neighboring towns. Caleb and Kiona had 3 children, a son named Samuel and 2 daughters named Aita and Nara, honoring the women who had changed everything. Caleb worked as a rancher and occasionally as a consultant to the territorial government on Apache affairs, helping to mediate disputes and prevent the kind of conflicts that had once torn the territory apart. Aita lived to see her grandchildren and great-grandchildren before passing peacefully in her sleep at the age of 68. The entire community mourned for a week, telling stories of her wisdom and courage. Muna's son Kai became a skilled tracker and guide, helping Apache families navigate safely between reservations and towns. Her daughter Ayana married a teacher and opened a second school in a neighboring community. 3 years after the trial, Muna found love again with a widower named Yuma, a craftsman who had also lost his family to Ashford's campaign. Together they raised a combined family of 5 children, proving that even after terrible loss, hearts could heal and families could be remade. On quiet evenings, Muna would tell her children and grandchildren the story of how she had once been a captive but had never stopped fighting for their freedom. Tala's school graduated its first class of students fluent in both Apache and English, prepared to navigate both worlds. Istas's son, Kuruk, became a healer like his mother, carrying on her legacy. But the greatest legacy was the land itself. Red Mesa became a symbol across the territory of what could happen when people stood up for justice, when women refused to be silenced, when the powerful were held accountable. The Redstone Treaty became a model for other tribes seeking to protect their rights, and the legal precedent set by Judge O'Connor's ruling was cited in cases across the Western Territories. On a warm afternoon in the summer of 1884, Caleb sat on the porch of his home, watching his children play in the yard. Kiona sat beside him, her hand resting on his knee. In the distance, they could see the oak tree where they had been married, where 7 women had once hung in the desert wind. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if things had gone differently?" Kiona asked. "If Ashford had succeeded? If we had died that day?" Caleb considered the question. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I look at our children, at this community, at everything we have built, and I realize that we did not just survive. We won, not just against Ashford, but against everything he represented, against the idea that some people matter less than others, against the belief that injustice can be hidden if you have enough money and power." Kiona nodded. "My mother used to say that the greatest revenge is not to become like your enemy. It is to build something so beautiful that your enemy's legacy becomes irrelevant." "We have done that," Caleb said. "All of you have done that." "Not just us," Kiona corrected. "You too. You were given a terrible choice at Blackwater Creek. You made the wrong decision. But you spent the rest of your life making the right ones. That matters." Their daughter Aita, now 4 years old, ran up to the porch. "Papa," she said, tugging on Caleb's sleeve, "tell us the story of the 7 souls." It was a ritual now, one the children never tired of. Caleb lifted his daughter onto his lap and began the tale. "Once upon a time, in a desert far from here but also right here, 7 brave women faced death and refused to die. They were hung from ropes in the wilderness, left to perish under the desert sun. But a traveler found them. He cut them down, and together they fought for justice." As Caleb told the story, sanitizing the violence for young ears but keeping the core truth intact, Kiona watched her husband's face. She saw the lines around his eyes, the silver beginning to show in his hair. She saw the scars he still carried, both visible and invisible. But she also saw the peace that had settled over him, the quiet contentment of a man who had found his place in the world. When the story ended and the children ran off to play, Caleb turned to Kiona. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For giving me a reason to live instead of just a reason not to die. For showing me that redemption is not about erasing the past, but about building a future. For loving me when I did not love myself." Kiona leaned her head on his shoulder. "We saved each other," she said simply. "That is what family does." As the sun set over Red Mesa, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the community gathered for the evening meal. Families came together, sharing food and stories and laughter, and in that moment, anyone watching would have seen not a collection of survivors clinging to scraps of land, but a thriving community that had overcome impossible odds to claim their rightful place in the world. The 7 souls of Red Mesa had been reborn from the ashes of tragedy, and in their rebirth they had created something that would endure long after they were gone, a legacy of courage, a testament to the power of justice, and a home where children could grow up free and proud, knowing that their mothers and grandmothers had faced death itself and won. This was the true victory, not just survival, but flourishing, not just justice, but joy, not just the end of suffering, but the beginning of hope. And as night fell over the desert and stars emerged overhead like diamonds scattered across black velvet, Caleb Stone held his wife's hand and knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The story of the 7 souls was complete, but the story of Red Mesa, of the generations that would follow, of the future that had been purchased with such terrible sacrifice. That story was just beginning, and it would be a story worth telling.